suggestions in a memo he sent me yesterday. Most all of them are typographical, that's grammatical, not substantive. And I would propose that Dan and I just get with Angie after the meeting because they're all grammatical except for one, and that's section 5 of your memo, Dan.
Yes.
Do you want to just talk about that real quick? And that's more substantive, so we need to.
Which section is that?
It's section 500. It's section 5 of his memo.
And it's in section, or Article 5. Get to it.
It goes to Article 5.
It's in the table, the permitted uses table. I can get to it and find it.
Page 46.
Well, one I've got is on page 42, but anyway, section 500.
Yeah.
I remember we had a good bit of discussion about it, about the section under public and institutional, specifically the very last item there, the public works maintenance facility. In my notes, at least, had reflected, and it could be incorrect, so that's why I think it's good for us to discuss it, that where it says a P in the column, the IR, which is the fourth column over, my notes reflect that we deleted that, but it still shows up. Does anybody else have any notes or recollection?
I didn't remember that, but didn't remember either way. But in the minutes, it said, upon reviewing the permitted use chart, it was decided to remove manufactured homes class A and B out of R2. The public works maintenance facility was also deleted out of R2. So that was R2, which was deleted. It didn't mention anything about the
That's sort of my recollection. It was deleted from one. I don't recall deleting it from IR. Now we looked at the map.
We tried to decide where they might be.
Yeah.
So, Dan, I'd suggest we leave it there, because that's what we did, I think.
Could we at least discuss it and consider whether to make it a special use permit? It just seems to me to have a public works facility in what is primarily a residential zone, is the between institutional and strictly residential. It just seems to be an improper use in that category.
Did we decide whether did the staff tell us whether they thought there were any maintenance facilities in IR?
If there were a maintenance facility, if the maintenance facility up on the lookout, that's in an IR district, I think. I'm not positive. I don't have a map in front of me, and I can't access the internet.
I didn't bring my map with me either.
Is that, do you know if that's,
I've got one, I'm sure if I can make it up on there.
it's not, it's what?
I don't know.
Wait.
You gotta look out.
Well, do y'all want to make it a special use unless there's one already there and make it permitted? What's your will?
I'd like to at least see the area, refresh my memory as to the area covered by that zoning classification. As I recall, that area is,
Looks like institution district.
it's sort of around the periphery of the town center.
And lookout goes through low density.
Right. And it looks to me, the existing maintenance facility I was thinking about is actually in an institutional district and not an IR. Looking at the IR on this map, and obviously we need to pass it around, but it looks like it's on the immediate periphery of the town center. And I think from my perspective, I would not have a problem with Dan's suggestion, but after looking at where that is.
So I'm going to take that as a motion by Dan and a second by Mason. Yes,
My motion would be to delete it altogether, PRS, but it sounds like I'm not voting on that. So,
well, if it's already there, though,
yeah.
then not really institutions.
I don't see any development happening around that existing facility up on Lookout.
Yeah, again, I think that's institutional anyway, so that wouldn't affect,
Just up here.
that would be permitted even with Dan's suggestion. He's only going from IR, which is Florida Avenue, downhill from Florida Avenue. That's uphill of Florida.
Yep.
Yes.
So are y'all, Dan, what do you want your motion to
Well,
be?
my motion would be to delete it altogether from the public maintenance facility, delete it altogether from IR. That would be my preference and motion.
Is there a second to that motion?
Let me ask a question to the town administrator. As the main public maintenance type user, would the town does the town have any possible plans for a maintenance facility in that area?
So the only thing that I'm concerned about is whether or not well houses would fall under that definition. Because we do have well houses throughout the zoning districts.
What was that?
Well house.
Well houses.
Well house.
That's the biggest concern, is that would fall under that definition.
And their maintenance, it's the maintenance of the wells.
Right.
We do have well houses throughout.
There would be two. There's a pump station on Appalachian, which looks like it's in that district for sure.
There are a lot of them. How many? There are 11, so they're all over the place.
So what's your will? The motion is to delete it. Is there a second to that? I just hate to bog down on something with all that we do. We can postpone it to our next meeting if you want. But is there any support for the motion to delete it altogether? Hearing none. Dan, would you like to make another motion?
I'll make a motion that it be changed from a P to an S, or permitted use to a special use.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Is there any more discussion? Are you ready to vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. So that will change to S.
Just in IR.
Just in the aisle.
And then, should I continue with?
Yes.
And then my second question, suggestion, is under, continuing down on the chart, under the commercial district, on page, I think it actually goes over to,
It's page 43 of what it is. And it's at the top of page 44 of general merchandise.
yeah, that's where it is. It's right at the very top of the next page, page 44, that section split. Again, in the IR, we have general merchandise and sales retail as a permitted use. And then if you flip back to page 43, all the other, what I would call retail type establishments, convenience store, drug stores, pharmacies, eating establishments, they're all special use. Again, my notes were a little unclear, a little like we may have discussed it briefly, but my suggestion, I guess I'll make a motion to speed up things, would be to change the permitted use for general merchandise and sales retail in the IR district, that's the fourth column at the top of page 44, to an S. So special use as opposed to permitted
That
use.
makes it consistent with the others. Is there a second? No second?
We're just making it consistent with all the other retail stuff.
I just would need to see the map before I can comment. Sorry.
You see how diligent.
Here comes the map.
Yeah, Mason, I defer to you looking at the map. My point is whatever the map is, it just seems to me it makes it consistent. All the other retail matters or special use in that zone, and this is the only one that just seems to be out of place.
Is
Be it
this where the,
permitted use.
where the bookstore is and
No, it's not. That's what I was concerned with. They can have a non-conforming use all of a sudden, creating a trap for the unwary. I don't, looking at this, it doesn't look like we would be creating any non-conforming uses by virtue of that change.
so there's nothing at the college, like a bookstore? Well, the bookstore is covered separately, and it's not permitted in that area.
Yeah, it looks like that this is mainly outside of most of the area of the college. It does cover a couple of the college dorms, but that's about it. And it covers the Freeland Hall post office area around, Georgia, the post office. I don't think I'd have a problem with seconding that motion.
Okay, I'll take that as a second. Is there any discussion?
Is permitted also professional services and bookstore?
Bookstore is P.
Right.
Let's take them one at a time.
Okay.
All in favor of changing general merchandise and accessories to S, C-I-R-P, say aye. All opposed. Thank you. Bill, you wanted to?
Based on that same logic, professional services is a P and bookstore is a P.
Any concern about that? Well, professional offices are shown on mine as an S.
Right. Right below it, professional services is a P. I'm not sure what's included in professional services is a pretty broad term.
Well, I'm professional services.
Right. I know. I don't have a suggestion. I'm just bringing it up.
Do y'all want to make that change? We apparently didn't do that before.
What is the difference between offices and services? We don't have a definition for services.
We could just delete it.
Where are you now?
Professional services
Yeah.
and professional offices in permitted uses chart. Professional offices is defined by the ordinance, but professional services is defined.
What is your will?
Just changing the name then?
I think what Adrian's suggesting, we just delete professional services. It's not a defined term and it's indistinguishable from
Right. Is there a
professional
motion
offices.
to do that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Thank you. So that's deleted professional services. Do y'all want to do anything with bookstore? Which is shown as P and R. Hearing
Well, if to be consistent, I'd make a motion that we change to an S, so it's like then it'll all be S's in that category.
right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'm just aware that MRA particularly has moved their, commercial facilities many times, in different places. My age group grew up when it was right on the creek down here, of course, in the post office and so forth. So we've never been harmed by any of those activities.
It's now permitted in institutional. It's permitted in IR. I've got questions for the change IR since it's both residential and institutional. It's the transition. Is there a motion to change that to S from P?
Just for the sake of consistency, I would make the motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion based on that?
I'm okay. I rubs me the wrong way about voting against the bookstore. I know, I know. It's just, I don't think my mother would.
Ruin Montreat, that bookstore.
Are y'all ready to vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
I'm opposed, and I'd like to record my vote as abstained last time since I have professional services. Just put
Would
an
you do
abstain.
that, Angie?
Thanks.
Thank you. Dan, I think that's it, except for the grammatical stuff. Right?
I think you're right.
Okay. Now, what I would like to do, what I'd like to suggest is that we hear Susan go through her presentation. And we didn't have a whole lot of things to look at, so it's probably a little bit, be helpful if you just go through the comments and mark up so that we understand it.
One of
You
them.
do? What now? For you to just go through your comments and the changes you made so that we have it into that. And what I want to suggest, our next meeting is for the 5th. After we do this, that some of us get together with Adrian and make sure we get it done right. As we agree, then come back to our meeting on the 5th and hopefully finally approve this so that we can then send it to council for their meeting on the 7th. Is that okay with y'all? Okay.
Sounds like a plan.
Good. Trying to move this along.
Are we doing this conflict of interest?
No, we're doing,
Alex,
we're doing this.
Alex, what about I sit up here?
Yes, and,
I can just lower it.
and
Thank you for the offer.
that's what she, right, that's what she, that relates to that, because that's what y'all note that, y'all look at, between now and the next meeting, on the comments that Adrian and I put together as some of the more important things we've done. Just make sure y'all are comfortable with that, and if we've left anything out, which I don't, just let us know. Okay. Susan, we're glad you're here.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So I'm not sure whether you started with model ordinances of some kind, but in reviewing the ordinance, I started with the School of Government's checklist of changes to local ordinances, policies, and practices. Do you have this?
No.
Okay, I'll send it to you
Okay.
because I found this to be very helpful. One of the things that they do is they list for certain chapters in 160D, they list things that you have to change, things that you might want to change, and then some things to be aware of. So this was a really helpful list for me when I started reviewing it because it's 160D, as you know, is long and it's dense. So it's kind of hard to just read 160D and then read the zoning ordinance and make sure you caught everything.
Yeah, what we did was we took the ordinance and went through it all together, moved some things around to make sure it read better. I think 160D was amended in the legislature at some point along the way, but it was after we started.
Okay,
So we did in some cases, Dan particularly looked at 160D, but I don't think we really took those guidelines, but
okay.
we'll take a look at that. If you'll send
Well,
it.
I'll send this so you'll have
Sure.
what I was looking at as well. And then the School of Government has.
Mr. Chairman, could I just insert something from the record? I think it's very possible that Stewart, who Susan was a consultant, although he did not circulate that checklist to us, I do know he was well aware and monitoring the changes in 160D.
I did a lot of that.
Yeah,
But-
so it didn't go unaddressed.
Right, and I think with the transition now and the extension of the deadline for the.
Right.
taxing time, I'm thinking the next zoning administrator probably will take a look at the ordinance just to make sure all that's in there.
Okay,
But we have at least started with that.
okay, all right.
Right.
So then the comments the general comments that I put together and sent to you late yesterday, and I'm sorry I didn't get it to you earlier. Like I said, I kept every time I thought I was done, I would see something else in 160D and think, well, did we address this? So
We know the feeling.
I'm sure you do. So one of the things, just right off the top, I'm not sure if the town is adopting a policy or some other ordinance to address conflicts of interest. But that's one of the things in the checklist from the School of Government, that it could be in this ordinance for this board, the Board of Adjustment and staff, or it can be in a separate policy, but the statute sets out what constitutes a conflict of interest for all of the people involved for the municipality.
Alice, I think, didn't, in the general ordinance on conflicts of interest, didn't we all sign something?
We have a conflict of interest policy.
Okay.
I haven't checked against this.
It expands what constitutes a conflict of interest, so probably if you're going to use that, you can go.
So I think the way to handle that is to have the general refer that to the town administrator
Okay.
to ask y'all if y'all would amend, consider the amendment. And Adrian, if you'd make a note, and I will too, that that needs to be in our recommendations, that they reconsider the conflict of interest policy in light of the amendments. Okay, thank you, Susan.
Another thing that I wasn't sure about is whether the town is in the process of developing a comprehensive plan. The 160D addresses a comprehensive plan, and it requires that when there are changes to the zoning ordinance or map, that the Board of Commissioners issue a statement that says either it is or is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Is that something that's in the works?
You have a company plan.
Okay.
2008, it needs to be updated.
Okay. Okay.
And it is referenced within the
So the things that are listed in the statute are covered in that comprehensive plan? Okay.
So we're okay
So,
with that.
well, what we probably want to do in the ordinance, though, is add a definition that, is that on the town website as well, the comprehensive plan? It
Yes,
is,
it is.
okay, all right. So, Adrian, have you looked at it against the statute to just sort of check off that it covers everything?
I haven't checked
Okay.
that.
Okay,
I'm sure about it, but
okay,
it does need to be updated. So that's, I think,
okay,
Again, for the record, several of us have looked at the comprehensive plan. They did a good job with the comprehensive plan. It is 10 years old, but overall, due to sort of the Great Recession, it's certainly not antiquated by any means.
Okay.
It needs to have some brush up, but it's actually a quite good plan.
Okay.
The way it's worded right now.
so then we just need to address in the zoning ordinance, in the amendment section, just make sure that the Board of Commissioners is issuing that statement for each zoning ordinance amendment.
Okay. So the board has to note that it is consistent. Okay. All right.
And one of the other things is minor modifications. So we're giving the zoning administrator authority to make a number of minor modifications. And so it would be good to have minor modification as a defined term. And one of the attachments that I sent late yesterday is guidance from the School of Government that has suggested ordinance language that we could look at, just so we can make sure that everywhere where we're giving the zoning administrator the authority to modify the requirements of the zoning ordinance, that it falls under the minor modification definition or provisions, so we don't get crosswise with what 160D requires.
Could I ask a question? You're talking about a minor modification. Is that the same as her interpreting the application of I don't remember us giving her the authority to modify the ordinance. I do know there's several times where the zoning administrator has the authority to make a determination of the application of it in a specific situation. So I'm not sure I understand what you're saying when we gave her or the zoning administrator the authority to modify, or even their minor modifications. Am I missing something?
I made a list and I didn't bring it with me, but I'll be happy to send it. Just some provisions that I think we need to just look at and make sure.
It's not modifying the ordinance, it's modifying the plan provision. So the plan approval is 10 parking spaces and they only have enough room for 9, given the zoning administrator the authority to do that without coming back to the board and going through that whole process again. But it has to be very specific on what you're going to allow to modify. But it's not, I would come into the ordinance and make a change. It's based on a plan that's been submitted and a current submission.
Okay, and I also remember things like, just one of the most recent amendments, the change we made to the ordinance was where those triple road lot, triple frontage lots and all that, where you decide which is front and side and rear and all that. If, in the case of misunderstanding or disagreement, we have given you the authority to determine which is front and side and back. And I get all of that, but that to me is just an application or interpretation of the ordinance. I don't see that as a minor modification or any kind of modification of the ordinance itself, which I thought that's what Susan was addressing. So that's my question. Do we have a situation where the zoning administrator can modify the ordinance, minor or otherwise? I don't think we do.
No, it's not saying I would modify the ordinance and the regulations that are in place. It's saying that a developer submits a plan and they need to move the structure 3 feet over. Instead of coming back and going through the permit process again, the administrator is allowed to say, yeah, you can move it 3 feet over instead of going through the whole process.
But is that what you were talking about? Do we need to put something in file or
So for
notes?
For those
Is
kinds
that a
of
minor
changes,
modification in your definition?
I think some of them do. Some of the things that are in the ordinance, I think, fall under the minor modification.
Can you send us that list that you're talking about?
Okay.
Yeah, because it really is a distinction as towards the modification of the ordinance. This, her comments say where the administrator has authority to modify the requirements of the zoning ordinance. So that might get to what Adrian is talking about. So, okay.
Although my recollection is, like Dan, we did not build, there's not been a lot of discretion given to zoning administrator to alter the requirements that otherwise are imposed.
Can I just read you the paragraph so it kind of makes sense? This is from the school government. And you provided it. I'll just read it.
Okay.
So the ordinance must define the types of changes that qualify for administrative review and the limits on such changes. Ordinances may include topics such as lot configuration, parking design, building location, and similar requirements as topics for which minor modification may be granted. The limitations are commonly phrased as numerical or percentage caps for the change, no more than 5 feet or 10%, for example. Communities may permit administrative modification of the site plan if it attaches a conditional approval to a conditional zoning district or special use permit. The ordinance may also define changes that do not qualify for minor modification, such as changes that would increase the traffic from the project beyond the levels of the transportation impact analysis or increase the stormwater impacts. Was identified in the stormwater analysis conducted as part of the original approval. So that's what we're talking about, and it would be clearly defined on what could be modified from by the zoning administrators numerically, so they will percentage wise.
Yeah, so like where we had the double frontage lots, you have the authority in cases where a lot would be unusable, I think was the term we left in there. You could reduce up to 50% of the setback on one of the frontages. Is that what you're talking about? You had that authority to reduce the setback by up to 50%.
This would be a separate section of the ordinance that lists out here are the things that the administrator has the ability to modify. And we can send you the list and it'll make more sense then.
Dan, yeah, I think what this would do is would give her the ability to, if we set a limit of 5 feet, make an exception for 30-foot front setback and make it up to 25 on a given potential. But we could also prohibit any change in setbacks too. It would be whatever the menu of changes, minor changes they could make would be the changes we specified and subject to limits we imposed.
And that, your suggestion needs to be a specific provision in the order.
With the fine modifications.
Right. Okay. If you'll send that to us.
Okay.
Okay.
So 160D-108 talks about vested rights and gives the property owner an option if there's a ordinance change pending to choose whether to come under old or new. That's not new. The vested rights procedure's been in place for a long time, but 108 does change it some. And I don't know if we have any need to address that in the zoning ordinance. I don't know if that's something that comes up here much or, okay.
Honestly, we could add to the ordinance just to be cohesive with the statute or not.
I mean, the statute applies whether the ordinance
Yeah.
sets it out or not, but,
Well, we do have some things that are vested, that if they were in existence as of some date, then you can go ahead, they're vested.
so these are for permits that are in place, or this would not necessarily be a non-conforming structure or use. This is for, if there is a certificate of zoning compliance in place, then the property owner, this statute addresses whether the property owner has vested rights in continuing with the plan that's been approved if there's a later change to the ordinance.
You mean to the plan
Between the
itself?
time, right, so between the time of approval and construction, if there's a change in this ordinance
Okay.
that affects that plan.
All right.
So-
But if that's not been a problem or an issue here,
Did you want to say something? Somebody say something.
I was going to say that, so this statute is going to supersede, I mean, anything we had to the contrary in the ordinance. So putting it in the ordinance wouldn't add anything. This is going to, whatever the state law is,
it is,
time to time it's
right.
going to supersede it. So if Adrian says it hasn't been an issue in the past, I don't know why we need to.
The only thing you would do is add the statutory language to the ordinance. Just kind of let the level, but it's going to be in place when you put it to work.
What's your will for directions to the small group that's going to be? No need for it?
Okay.
Everybody agree? Okay. All right, thanks.
And is a revision to the subdivision ordinance also in the works? Is that, so,
Not by us, so, but that might be something that we ask the town to consider
okay.
also. Yeah.
The planned unit development district, where would that be? Where would that zoning district be
Would be an overlay district.
for just areas that are,
There are just a couple areas, one of which would be the Graham property area.
okay,
That's probably the predominant, which is about a 200-acre area. There's one other area where we think it might have application, but those
Okay.
are going to be the two areas. They're very specific.
so we would want to make sure that the zoning ordinance and the planned unit development district, that we look at those together and make sure they're consistent, that everything that's in the planned unit development district provisions is consistent with what's in the subdivision ordinance.
And that would happen at the time you approve the plan unit development.
I'm sorry?
That would be at the time you approve the specific PUD. Because we haven't approved any PUDs, we just provided for the process.
Okay,
So I think that would be when you adopt, when the town, if they do adopt that, that's when they would have to see what the consistencies are.
okay,
I was thinking that the planning development district would be an option besides the subdivision ordinance, but you're saying it
Well, it may be, I wasn't quite sure where we were going with the planned unit development district, whether we were trying to incorporate subdivision ordinance kinds of things into that or not, if that was still going to be separate.
I think it's separate, but maybe have some.
Okay,
Mason was, this came
Yeah,
from.
no, we consider it separate.
separate, okay,
Okay.
It's just another option for development,
okay.
for the landowner.
And then the conditional zoning district, was that a model ordinance that you were working off of?
We used materials from the School of Government,
Okay,
and as well as looked at some, Stuart brought some other ordinances from several towns. And
Okay.
we sort of utilized all of those materials in preparing.
and is that also where the provisions for the planned unit development district came from?
I believe so, yes. My recollection isn't quite as specific. I think with the PUD, Stuart actually did the first cut at the PUD ordinance himself. I
Okay.
believe he was using similar materials. Stuart and I sort of put the conditional one together, so I'm more familiar
Okay.
with how that was compiled.
Okay, all right. And then just under general comments, the other thing that I've noted here is that there are places where we use the term setback where we're probably, there are places where we seem to be using yard and setback interchangeably. And I didn't go through and look at everywhere that it's used. This is just sort of a general impression. And so my question is, do we want to just settle on the term setback and change the definition of setback? Or do we want to keep yard and just look at, make sure that where we're using the term setback, we don't mean yard?
Well, the yard actually defines what the whole space is, and then look at the definition of page 16. And then we do refer to, as we establish what the, for example, what yard is. That's the, we call it open space on the same lot, that's between the front setback line and the property line. So that's outside of the setback, as I read that, between the setback line and the property line, and that's open space. So, don't you think we still need setback and yard?
It seems like they're two separate terms. The setback determines what the yard is.
Yeah.
But they're two different things
Okay.
to me.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
So then what I'll do is look at where we're using setback and see if we need to be using the term yard. There were just a couple of places that, and I didn't mark them. That's just a
That'd
general
be helpful
comment.
when you exactly where you're pointing to, because you may be exactly right. We may have interchanged them incorrectly, inappropriately, or unintentionally. But to me, they're two different things. The setback is, you've got to set your house back so many feet from the property line, et cetera, et cetera. And once that setback is determined, you now know what the yard is, the side yard, front yard, whatever.
Okay,
That's what
Right.
Okay.
So then the specific sections, these are just some suggested changes. I wasn't sure what the effective date was going to be, so,
That's a really good question, because effective date of this ordinance, but there's some dates that we wanted to have it go back to when the original ordinance was established, because we didn't want to create new nonconformities that were, so the date is very critical.
well, we may create new non-conforming uses and structures with the, depending on whether there are things out there. There's some things that were already non-conforming when the original zoning ordinance was adopted. And so those are covered as existing non-conformities. And then if the change creates a new non-conformity, it's a non-conformity as to the revised ordinance.
Yep.
So,
Do y'all remember on the effective date that, I remember something about January of next year.
The only reason I remember that came up a couple of times, I think I had mentioned, depending on when it's effective, we may have a 3 or 4 month period here where we use the old ordinance and then the
Right.
new ordinance will start on January 1st.
Right.
And then- So I think to avoid the confusion, as long as we make the effective date of the ordinance, if the town council adopts it January 1st or later, it makes it effective January 1st, or even if it's not before, but don't make it effective January 1st, I think it eliminates the question that Susan's raising, if I understand it.
right,
Because right now, we're under one ordinance, as of January 1st, we'll be under 160D.
Right.
So if our new ordinance is adopted, we should just make it effective January 1st,
January
whenever it's adopted, and then
Okay.
we don't have that concern. Is that,
right, that was what I was, yeah. Because if we have it effective earlier, there may be some provisions that we need to, state
Right.
that it's effective.
yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with the non-conformity issue, which
Okay.
goes back to the 85 date and all that.
Right.
This is just when
Ordinance.
how the ordinance relates to this new ordinance, new statute. How our ordinance relates to the new statute, effective January 1st.
And it seems to me that January 1st would be the day. regardless.
Certainly no sooner than that. As long as it's not sooner than January 1st, it'll all apply under the new ordinance. New statute, the statute.
The new statute's been extended, so it goes into effect when you adopt the new changes to your ordinance.
But if you provide in the ordinance that the effective date is X, then that's one of the things you've done, so that would be okay. So I think Dan's suggestion is appropriate. So that if it's adopted in February, it would relate back to January 1st.
Doesn't have to.
No.
Or we can make it effective February 1st. As long as you don't make it effective prior to January 1. Anytime January 1st or later, we're okay.
Okay. You all happy with that? Okay.
So if it's adopted in February, then the effective date's going to be February.
Right.
But if you
Okay.
adopt it in November,
You could make it effective, right.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, section 105,
Can you go back to 10, I'm looking at Article 1, Section 101.
101, that's
So what
just
we did,
a,
we left a lot of it just the same,
right,
didn't move it. So
Um,
I really liked your language. It was much more concise, but
it simplifies it. And, I mean, it's whatever you like better, but it was just a suggestion from me. Then in section 104, purposes, some of the purposes that are set out in the zoning ordinance are actually included in general ordinances. So I was just looking at which things are not actually covered in the zoning ordinance.
well, in purpose, I had a question of the deletion of the references to the EKG, because that is part of the zoning jurisdiction.
Let's see, I was looking at
I'm looking at you.
160D-701.
This was one we pretty much left it like it was, as I recall.
I don't recall revising anything.
Okay, so 160D-701 just sets out a list of things. And that, I don't think it necessarily doesn't preclude other things. I was just making 104 conform to this list, but it's, you know, it says among other things, so it could be, we could leave that in.
Okay. So what's y'all's will on that?
You know, I think that's fine, leave the ETJ language in the first half of that paragraph, but I think it's probably appropriate to, we don't deal with steep slopes, we don't deal with traffic, we don't deal with fire in this ordinance, so it's appropriate to take those out.
Everybody okay? Okay. 105,
So section 105 has been, has caused confusion in the past because 105 says that the stricter provisions, if there's a conflict between provisions, the stricter provisions apply. But we have a hillside ordinance that gives the zoning administrator and town administrator the ability to reduce the front setback, front yard requirement if the lot meets certain requirements. It's very steep,
Yeah.
you know, side, all of those kinds of things. And so the question has come up about whether the more restrictive is what the zoning ordinance says. And so this section says that that would control. And so, you know, we may want, and then there's the double frontage lot, you know, giving the zoning administrator the ability to reduce that. Well, is that, you know, is that provision, does that even mean anything if the most restrictive provision is the one that applies? And so one thing that we might be able to do is say, so for example, in yard requirement, you make it clear that this is the yard requirement, but it's subject to change under the Hillside Development Ordinance, under section 609, you know, other provisions of the ordinances, so that it's clear that the town, that, you know, we're not saying you have to look at those numbers in the, you know, for the yard requirements and you can't deviate from that. Because that's the most restrictive. So you can't have something less. So that's just something that has come up just for the board, the commission to be aware of, because we have needed to address that question. And we weren't, if we had it would be nicer to have a clearer answer to that question.
well, after we finish with this, we're supposed to go on to steep slope and stormwater ordinances, so maybe we could deal with it there. I sort of hate to get into each unique provision and say that, well, notwithstanding this, the provisions of the steep slope ordinance are being controlled.
The problem is it needs to be addressed in the zoning ordinance based on this, I think Susan's point to, the yard requirements. So the Hillside Development Ordinance has a provision that the front yard setback can be reduced by 50%.
Right.
But there could be an argument made that the zoning ordinance says the front yard setback is 30%. It covers,
It's
it trumps the Hillside Development Ordinance, so therefore 50% front yard setback can't be issued.
Right.
So if we put the language in the zoning ordinance to say front yard setback is also may be subject to language from, I don't know, where in this ordinance, and I think that would help alleviate that problem.
I think it would be helpful to have it in this ordinance, because this is what, I mean, this came up for us where we were addressing this. And, you know, the only thing that we really found that was helpful to us is that in the definition of yard, in that first paragraph, it says, except where encroachments are expressly permitted, in that first paragraph of the definition of yard. And, you know, maybe to just be a little bit more specific there, you know, except where, not encroachments, because that word, it wasn't real clear in the situation we had that necessarily covered well, at least let me put it this way. Other people were arguing that didn't cover the reduction under the Hillside Development Ordinance. And so just to have it clear so that the town, the staff knows this is what we can do, this is what the ordinance that says we can do it.
Can you give us suggestions of where we ought to specifically deal with this?
I can,
Or should we, I guess we
It's,
should just go back. See, Adrian is leading us.
right.
to-
Adrian, don't go.
Amen.
I can pull together a list of the ones that I am aware of. There may be others,
There
and so we
probably
might
will be.
need, a sort of a catch-all.
I was going to say, is there some general language we might add to this, which basically says regulations which are more specific as opposed to general about a given situation
Maybe that's how we.
would
address it.
supersede the more
Right.
general regulation. I'm just suggesting, because the hillside obviously is a more limited
Right,
fact situation than the general zoning ordinance. So
Right.
may look to that kind of language.
okay.
Okay, that's a good suggestion, Mason.
Yeah, I agree with Mason. It seems to me that rather than trying to identify the 4, 5, 6, or 8, or 20, 30 situations, we need to have some general language like we've got in 105, but maybe that just needs to be modified to cover, like Mason's suggestion, maybe exactly what we need. But I think we got to have a general statement where there is a disagreement or inconsistency, which trumps the other.
Right.
Right now, we're saying the more restrictive, maybe that's not the language. we
Maybe
want.
that's not enough. Should we refer, as by way of example, the steep slope ordinance, section whatever?
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
There-
In this-
I don't think there are that many. I think you take front yard setback, for instance, and put an asterisk and in the zoning ordinance to say possible reduction in hillside. You just so that someone looking at the zoning ordinance, that's all they need to look at to find out whether or not they could use their property. Then they would know to look at the hillside.
Well, I would think if we can come up with the language that Mason suggests, because I don't want to miss one, is what we did when we go forward. So if we have the general language, I think that serves us better.
Or maybe both, maybe we have it both in the definition of yard or in Article 5, where we have the setbacks, just have,
A general statement there, sure.
except as,
Okay. I don't think we've ever discussed which we think should take precedence, other than the more restrictive, but I can hear what you're saying.
So is it, I think when without having a specific lot that you're talking about, just sort of as a general premise, if you say, do we want the most restrictive provision to apply? The answer is, of course. Why wouldn't we want that? But we do have certain times when what's in the zoning ordinance is made, when it's made less restrictive by other ordinances, or could be in certain circumstances.
Okay. All right, we'll try to look at both ways of doing this. Okay.
In the definitions, there are several places where I noted that I did not find a term being used in the ordinance. I think these are probably, they've been in the zoning ordinance, some of them maybe since 1985, but we're not using them anymore in other places. So I just noted a question,
I saw that.
and like antenna, I searched for the term antenna, and the only place I found it was in the definitions.
I checked every place you questioned, and they weren't in there anywhere,
Okay,
using a Control H search in
Yeah.
Word. So
okay.
you were correct in every instance.
So we probably ought to take them out then.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I would think.
And then I think we do want to add a definition of comprehensive plan, because we will be I think we do need a provision that addresses when you amend the zoning ordinance, you have the statement that the amendment either does or is or is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. So just adding a definition, so we're not having to say what it is all through the, anywhere it's used, the term is used, we can just have it as a defined term.
Yep, I think that's a good idea. So we would, and then if they amend the comprehensive plan next year, we'd have to go back and amend this ordinance too, to refer to the new comprehensive plan when they do that.
Or simply
No, it's
say as adopted by, updated and adopted by the
Okay.
Board of Commissioners, something like that.
Okay.
Here's where we start. We start with the 2008 plan, but the Board of Commissioners, we know today that the Board of Commissioners will be updating it.
Okay.
It's not zoning. So it's the town does the update of the comprehensive plan, supposedly every 5 years, and usually it doesn't happen every 5 years. But the town and the council sort of marshal that. So it's really for us for planning and zoning merely would adhere to whatever comes out of it.
I think as amended, we covered that. Is here, okay.
So the other, the next definition question I have about, do we want to add certain defined terms? These were things that came up as I was looking at Article 3, and they're used in the statute, and so I kept finding myself talking about a developmental approval, which primarily is going to be the certificate of zoning compliance. But it could be, I guess there's some other things that might fall under that, that umbrella. But as you look at the changes, these are just suggestions. Everything that there are a few corrections, but most everything is a suggestion.
Yeah.
I can tell the committee, I looked at the new definitions that she proposed. They're good definitions. They're compatible with the statute, and sticking them in the Section 200 definitions as well as the comp plan as opposed to Section 201 definitions, I think is appropriate.
Okay.
If the committee decides to use those definitions.
Okay. Okay.
But it makes the language a little bit simpler in some places.
Okay.
And then I'll just confess that I'm not real clear on what the difference is between a manufactured home and a modular home when I read the definitions. Now, I did not look up the standards that were referenced, and maybe if I had, I would understand this, but it seemed like they were kind of the same thing. So one of them is treated as just a dwelling and the other one is not. And maybe the standards that are referenced answer that question and we don't need to talk about it anymore. But I'm just noting that when I read it, I wasn't entirely clear on what the difference is between them.
I think what we did, and Stuart just put in what the definitions were in the statute. I don't think we came up with anything new.
In 160D?
Andy, do you know where he?
I don't have the original ordinance in front of me, so I don't know what the
Okay.
original definition was, but actual difference in them is the very spectrum side. So I don't know if that needs to be. Modular homes are inspected by North Carolina, or follow the North Carolina building code, even if common law, follow the common area building code. So I don't know if that needs to be included in that.
Okay.
But Stewart had a statutory basis.
That he
for-
was,
right,
okay,
yes.
all right. And, I don't know that much about either one of them, so it may be that, if, in applying the ordinance, do you think there is any confusion, or is it pretty clear? The difference between a modular home and manufactured home?
I think it's pretty clear.
Okay, all right. So moving on to Article 3. I read 160D 403 several times. Because the first time I read it, I thought, okay, we can reduce the duration of a certificate of zoning compliance. But then the second time I read it, I thought we couldn't. So definitely went back and forth on this. But where I landed was, I think it's a year. I think we can make it longer, but I don't think we can make it shorter. Did Stuart, okay, are you, okay.
And that's legal advice that we should take.
That's the way I read that statute. And I'll be the first to admit, the first time I read it, I thought we could reduce it, but then looking at it more closely, I don't think we can. And I think if there's a question, we should just go with the 1 year instead of the year and a 6 month and possible extension.
Are y'all happy with changing it to 12 months?
Sure.
I'm prepared to say yes. Okay?
And with regard to manufactured home, in the original, manufactured home does not have to meet the building code requirements. Those are controlled by the state and there are standards for a manufactured home. Modular home has to meet the building code
Okay.
requirements as though it was stick built, it looks like. That's in our original zoning.
I guess if I were just looking at one, I don't know if I would know the difference. But as long as the zoning administrator and the building inspector know, then that's what we need.
I think there's some confusion in this 301.3 not looking at it. Because the zoning permit is valid for 6 months. Or there's a 6 month time period for construction. You have time to commence construction. Once construction commences, you have a year.
Oh, okay. So did I get confused about?
That's not you, I think it's the way it's written, sorry.
Where are you reading from?
301.3.
Okay, so what that says is, in changing it, within 12 months, on which the certificate of zoning compliance is issued, construction is not begun, this certificate shall expire.
They have 6 months to start construction. This says it expires in 12 months.
Yeah, the statute says it expires 1 year after the date of issuance. Doesn't say anything about construction. Okay, now reading on, it says 1 year after the day of issuance, if the work authorized by the developmental approval has not been substantially commenced. So is that,
That's for zoning permits. This is trying to be in line, the original ordinance is trying to be in line with building permits. I think you're trying to coordinate building and zoning. 6 month and 12 month time frame for building permits is.
yes. Okay.
Y'all have lost me on this.
Yeah.
So the certificate of zoning compliance, the language, the statute addressing the duration of that certificate is different from the building permit. And we were trying to have them be the same originally in our ordinance. Okay.
So are you saying we're all right with the 6 and 6 then? Or should it be 12?
I think it should be 12.
Are y'all okay with the 12?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you agree, Adrian? Okay.
Susan, as I look at that page 18, which is where 301.3 is, one of the things that we had, that the application for zoning compliance certificate would be, this is just some of the mechanics we did. We just said evidence of title because you might get a title commitment and show it. So we thought the deed, it originally was the deed or other document, but we changed that, thinking it'd be easier just to have an opinion.
So
Is
a
that okay?
title commitment would not be evidence of title. I mean, the title commitment can be issued and you don't buy the property.
Okay, but that would show who owned it. And it's what it says is as of that date, title is vested.
Title is vested in such and such.
What section are we looking at now?
I'm in
So-
301.1 subparagraph 9.
So when I use the term title commitment, I'm thinking a commitment for a title company to issue title insurance.
Correct.
And that's not the actual policy that's issued when someone buys the property. That's just the title company saying, we'll issue title insurance. And usually there's a list of requirements that have to be met.
But in
And there's a
Schedule A,
list of,
Section 1, it says title is vested as of the effective date, is vested in Mason Light.
not in a commitment.
I'm sure it does, subject to the following. I mean, you've got Section A1, B1, and B2.
I think that's a policy,
That's the policy itself.
as opposed to the commitment. But we don't use the term commitment policy here. We just simply, other evidence establishing ownership.
So,
It's not a big
I mean,
deal.
we could leave evidence of title, but I'm not sure that a title policy, I mean, I'd rather see a deed
I don't know that it's,
or a will.
I would just assume, leave it, will, again, we say other document establishing.
Right.
Somebody could bring in a 20-year-old policy, and yeah, that, you might ask for something more, but somebody could bring in a 1-year-old policy. I don't know how that's any different than bringing in a copy of a deed that's 5
So-
years old.
North Carolina is one of the few states that is a race to the courthouse state. So your deed, if I give you a deed and I give Adrian a deed and she gets to the courthouse first, she owns the property.
Well, I know, but if somebody brings in a copy of a 5-year-old deed, that really doesn't tell you who really, that's not much assurance about who owns the property today.
Well-
Without getting a title update on that, which you're not asking them to bring in. So what I'm suggesting is a title policy that's 1-year-old is probably better evidence than a deed, a copy of the deed that's 10 years old. And
Okay.
I'm just saying,
Okay,
I'm looking at a title commitment that our firm issued last month on Old Republic. It's Schedule A of the commitment. This is not a policy. It says, the estate or interest in the land, this is number 3, is fee simple. 4, title to the estate or interest in the land in the commitment. As of the commitment that is vested in. So it does show. who
it
is
has the
vested.
buyer's name or the seller's name?
This has the current owner.
But is that the buyer or the
Doesn't
seller?
matter. That's showing,
Okay.
so I bring this commitment into you, and I'm the seller, that's going to show that it's vested in me.
If you're the seller, right.
Okay, well, I don't want to belabor it.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I've never thought of a title insurance policy being evidence of title. It's insuring the title, but it's not evidence of the title.
I have no concern about evidence of title as long as, so the term title, if I were somebody who didn't buy and sell much property and didn't read statutes and ordinances much, I'm not sure that I would understand, maybe I would, but I don't know if that term is as easy to understand as, a document that establishes ownership. But again, these are suggestions. So if you like evidence of title better, that's fine.
I would prefer deed or other evidence of title, copy of deed or other evidence of title.
And the other strange quirk of North Carolina law is that when you inherit property here, the will is the link in the chain of title for you. There's no deed from the executor like there is in South Carolina and other states. The will being probated is what vests title in you. And so if you inherit property, which many people in Roundtree have done, there's no deed. I mean, the last deed might be to their grandparents.
That's true.
And there may in fact be no will.
Right,
Maybe intestate.
might be intestate, right.
Okay. Are y'all happy with deed or other evidence of title?
Yes.
I'm sorry to belabor that. It just occurred to me there.
Okay.
Okay. Moving right along. It's 20 of 12 now. I've got to read 12.
Okay. Why don't, let's see.
And I suppose that our small, we've only got a few more, and the small group that gets together can get back with Susan. And Adrian, I assume we can call you even though you're working at Woodford. We'll call you many things if you don't accept our call.
That's conflict of interest.
So just let me jump ahead to the certificate of compliance under section 302.4. This is something that has come up in the past as well. Because we revised the certificate of compliance so that it's signed by both the zoning administrator as to zoning matters and the building inspector as to building code matters. Because Adrian wasn't signing off on building code and the building inspector's not signing off on zoning. And so is it still a revised or has that changed?
It can change.
It did, okay.
Yeah. I haven't signed it in a while, I guess.
Okay, so just the building inspector is signing them?
I think we changed it.
I can't hear what you said.
Maybe it's changed.
To what?
To where the zoning inspector is holding.
Either
Zoning
one.
administrator, building inspector signing for that.
So that would mean the appropriate would be,
You know, just let's, whatever,
or the authorized, how about authorized would be appropriate.
we just need to make sure that what's in the ordinance is consistent with what's happening on the ground. Because before, I think these were being signed by the building inspector, but he was not really looking at zoning compliance.
Okay, well, we'll check that with what we did. Okay.
So then I got, in section 307, it seemed like we had enforcement provisions in several different places, and this is all in red, in part because I was moving things. It wasn't all that I was changing things, but when you have redlining on, if you take a provision and you move it somewhere else, it's all in red. It shows that you deleted it in one place and put it in another. So a lot of this is reorganization, just to, because when I read through it, I got kind of lost between, where am I in the enforcement provisions? This is just a suggestion. If you don't like it, it doesn't matter. These are
Sure.
suggestions.
Well, we'll take a look at that, because I did think you approved it in many ways.
We don't want somebody to read it, and we don't want this to be like reading the Internal Revenue Code, where you have to have all the different provisions spread out in front of you to understand what you need to do.
Yeah. Before you leave 303, this was pretty important for us in the composition of both the zoning adjustment and the planning commission. And it had to do in the definition of the ETJ. That there is, in two respects, there is no portion of McDowell County in the ETJ other than conservation property, is what we concluded. Is that right? There was no residential, no commercial.
Since top of the bridge down.
So we provided that the town would let to the two bodies, not someone who had to be a resident of the ETJ, but only a person who resided in Buncombe, for the Buncombe County ETJ, and that would be someone who either owned or resided on property in ETJ. Like Alan, I don't think he resided, I think he resided in Black Mountain,
Yes, I currently reside here, but I do have property in the
but you own property.
Yes.
So he's the member of the commission that's elected by the town to represent the Buncombe County ETJ. So, and I think you had changed it to say they had to be a resident of the ETJ.
Right, so 160D-307, what it says is that if the town exercises ETJ, which it has, it shall provide a means of proportional representation based on population. So McDowell County, we have no population, we have no, there's nobody living in the McDowell County ETJ. But I'm not sure that we can have an ordinance that says, don't consider McDowell County. I mean, right now, there's nobody living there. Could there someday be somebody? It's a conservation district, but
Yeah.
could that ever be changed? I don't know.
I mean, it's literally a
But-
strip, it's not,
But I think what the town could do is look at it and say, nobody lives there. Instead of the ordinance saying, don't look at McDowell County, the statute says, look at McDowell County. You might determine that there does not need to be representation for McDowell County on a board because nobody lives there. But there's a difference between saying, we're not going to consider McDowell County and saying, we're going to consider it and there's nobody there, so we don't need representation. And then it says representation shall be provided by appointing at least one resident of the entire extraterritorial planning and development area to the planning board, board of adjustment.
So it does say resident.
It says resident.
Okay, so I think we have to follow the statute.
but what if there aren't any resident interests available to serve?
Let's see. If there is an insufficient number of qualified residents in the extraterritorial area to meet membership requirements, the County Board of Commissioners may appoint other residents of the county necessary to make up the requisite number.
So that's the county doing that.
Mhm.
So what if we provide the county does nothing, we can go ahead and do it? Are you saying we can't do that either?
Historically, if the
If they-
county did not appoint, then the city council, town council did appoint.
I
Yeah,
just want
and
the
that's what
statute
this,
says.
that's what the statute says. If the County Board of Commissioners fails to make the appointment within 90 days after receiving a resolution from the town requesting that it be made, the Town Board of Commissioners can make it.
Good, that's what we say. Okay, so that's good. But you're saying statute, we'll check the statute. It does say the person has to be a resident.
So that's the first provision, and then if there aren't any, if we don't have anybody who's a resident of ETJ and is willing to serve, then the County Board of Commissioners can appoint someone else who's a resident of Buncombe County, or McDowell if there turns out never to be anybody living there.
So if there are like 30 people who reside there, but none of them wants to do it, or we figured that's too small a number, then we can appoint, the town can appoint Alan, who owns property there, but doesn't reside there.
Mhm.
So we probably need to nudge this a little bit.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just one other thing that has come up a couple of times is if there's an appeal of the building inspector's determination unless it has to do with zoning. If it has to do with building code, that appeal goes to the Commissioner of Insurance and not to the Board of Adjustment. And there's been some confusion over that in the past. People weren't real sure where to file an appeal. I don't know if we need to just have a sentence that says an appeal of the, an appeal of the building inspector's determination is made either under the section in 160D or to the Commissioner of Insurance, just to clarify for residents. Does that come up often, Adrian, or just the once the recent? Okay. Might not be a big deal, but.
Is there anything in there right now about an appeal for the building inspector?
But it's generally going to be a contract, and we understand about the Department of Insurance. It's life safety. So they rule.
I mean, certainly contractors are, but I don't know about neighboring property owners, whether they're going to have any understanding of that or not.
But we do need to provide for appeals of the building inspector's determinations, of the building commission.
But just simply to say, if you're appealing a building inspector determination, you go under this other statute.
All right. See,
What's our next meeting?
hmm?
Is our next meeting, you said the fifth?
The 5th, whatever that Thursday is, I think.
That's the 5th. Tuesday's the 3rd.
Thank you. Okay. So we've been talking about 307 also. We organized that.
So in the zoning board of adjustment section, these are, mostly just adding some statutory references.
We'll get with you on those things. Our little group will follow up on that.
And then I will look at section 510 and section 511 and the manufactured housing definition more closely. I wasn't sure what, with 510 and 511, what we were, whether those came from Land to Sky or somewhere else. I wasn't sure how much I needed to, if I just needed a quick review or if I needed to look at them in more depth.
You might check, Mason had a lot to do with drafting that, so you might check with Mason.
Stewart, Land of Skyward.
Okay. Okay. So I don't think I need to do a very extensive review of those sections.
Stuart would probably, he would know pretty quickly what he did. In the planning and development district, that really came from, as Mason had already said, from some Florida experiences. And I think that Stuart had some suggestions.
Okay. Okay.
Can we, we'll have a small group, if that's okay, if we can get you to come back over and go over it more line by line, and we can get
Okay.
that done after we get to the meeting on the 5th. So sometime next week. If that's okay. Yeah, but we'll try to get with you sometime next week to go through it all, to make sure we get exactly done what you want us to do.
Okay. Yeah, just let me know. And we'll just Zoom with Adrian.
Well, we thank you for coming because it's, I mean, this is the kind of.
Oh, this is a huge,
Yeah, so don't, we appreciate it.
this is a huge undertaking. Y'all have done a good job. It's just, there's a lot to do, a lot to cover.
Well, I think some of the lay people on this committee that aren't lawyers think we have really looked for lawyers, not you, but all of us. And, so we'll be glad to get through this.
Right, yeah.
So, okay, is there any other business to come before us today? Would someone like to move that we adjourn? I would like to say on the record that we appreciate what Adrian.
Amen.
Yes, thank you, Adrian.
If that's over, we're going to withdraw that if you don't return our calls. Okay, motion's adjourned. Bill Roberts made it.
Second.
Wade seconded. All in favor, say aye. All opposed. Thank y'all. And again, I appreciate everybody's patience because this is very tedious.
And you can put your money on the fact this ordinance will not be in effect January 1st.
Yeah,
Council got approved.